Welcome to the Vintage Ballers Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Carino, and on today's episode, we have Dave Burcham joining the show. Dave spent the majority of his career as the sports editor for the Warren Tribune, where they were recognized 5 different times as the best sports section in Ohio during his reign. He also got to cover various famous Youngstown athletes and coaches, including Jim Tressel, Maurice Clarett, Ross Browner, Ray Boom Boom Mancini, Ernie Shavers, and Bernie Kosar. So without further ado, please welcome to the show, Dave Burcham. So Dave, I mean, to get this started, I want to give a shout out to Jim Guido for making this happen. And, he told me about you a while ago, and actually he told me about you quite a while ago and said, you need to get Dave on the show. And I want to give a shout out to him putting this together. I've worked for Jim now for about 10 years. And, one of the most solid people you'll ever meet in life, just a great stand-up guy. And I've known him and Pam for quite a while now and his family, and just great people. So I want to give a shout out to Jim.
Quite a character too, isn't he?
He's quite the Guidos in general. I love Jim and Joe, and I've known them for years. So yeah. I want to give them a big shout out for making this happen. And real quick, I want to take it back to your youth, way back in your youth. When did you fall in love with sports, and where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in East Liverpool, Ohio. Down on the Ohio River, and loved sports, which my dad was not a sports fan. My mom, I think, followed the Pirates because that was Pittsburgh territory. But it just interested me, and I just loved all about it. And of course, there wasn't as much on TV back in the 50s and early 60s. Although I do remember Home Run Derby. You probably don't know what that is, but
I used to watch all the time when I was younger.
Home Run Derby, yeah.
I loved the Home Run Derby when I was younger.
That was great.
Oh, it
was. Got my love of sports there, and the thing was, I was just a very average athlete, but I loved sports, and so how can an average athlete stay involved in sports all his whole life? To write about it, so it kept me close to what I love, kept me young too, because as you're going in the locker rooms, those kids all stay the same age.
That's true.
40 years later, the kids are still the same age. So, I guess I thought I was the same age too.
Dave, did you have any favorite sports growing up?
Yeah, of course, Ohio, even more so back then than it is now, was a football first. Everything was football, and grew to love baseball, basketball. Just piqued my interest. Just love everything that I could get about it. Played them all. Wasn't very good at any of them, but I just loved it. I thought it was great, and I guess I was so jealous of the kids that have it. The kids that can just step on the court or step on the floor, and they've just got the abilities and they can get it done. But God is good, because my grandkids in Philadelphia, I've got 2 grandsons in Philadelphia, and my kids both played. I had a son and a daughter. They both played at Boardman High School, and they were decent athletes. And I told them that when they played, just play hard. Play everything you do, just play hard and be team players, because I always felt that was what was missing. And they did that, and I was very pleased with that. But now, as my grandkids are out there, they've got some skills. So I'm enjoying it. They're playing hard, and they've got the skills. They put the two together. So that's great.
And when you look back at your youth, and I actually, real quick, I want to give you a quick story. So my father, he grew up in Cleveland, and he grew up next door to Rocky Colavito. That was their next door neighbor. So he right away, obviously, sports became a big part of his life, because Rocky this is like, my dad's 71, so he was a little kid then. This is, but he was 5, 6, 7 years old. I'm
72, so I'm right there with him.
Okay, you're right in the same generation. So he always tells me Rocky was huge back then. He goes, you don't understand how big he was. He was huge. So it's like growing up next door to LeBron James. This is huge. Yeah. So they used to have.
Well, I remember the 4 home run game he had.
Yes.
Which just lit everybody up. And of course, I was in East Liverpool, and as you get closer to Cleveland, as I migrated out to Youngstown and then to Warren, everything became about 80% Cleveland, 20% Pittsburgh. But when I was in East Liverpool, it was 80% Pittsburgh and 20% Cleveland. So, I was more into, and of course they didn't have interleague play that time. So you just saw when you went, we were fortunate. We go to Pittsburgh, we see the National League, we go to Cleveland, we see the American League. Loved it.
And it's funny because one of my good friends is Todd Blyleven and Burt Blyleven's son. So and he always talks about being in the Pirates locker rooms with Dave Parker and all the Willie Stargell. I mean, these legends back in the 70s.
Yes.
And then, of course, in the Twins locker room with Kirby Puckett and 87 and that Kent Herbeck and all those guys. So there's so much sports background we can get into, and I can't wait to dig into all this with you. But I wanted to give you my background. My dad grew up next to Rocky, huge sports fan, and my brother was a great basketball player back in the day. He's the all-time leading scorer for North Olmsted High School. And he played at a college called Rio Grande down in Southern Ohio. So
Rio Grande connects with me because one of the great legends from where I grew up and where I became sports editor and wrote about was named Bevo Francis.
Yeah, exactly.
Bevo Francis is the star of all stars. I've got to tell you, I once saw Bevo Francis. Now, this is long after his playing days were over, but he came to Memorial Auditorium, which was the high school gymnasium in East Liverpool. And I'd heard so much about the guy. And so he was putting on a shooting exhibition, and he went to the corner and he fired up the first one. And he didn't hit anything. And I got a little chuckle. Then I think he had 12 in a row. It was like, okay, let me just get the feel. And then, then it was like he was automatic. But I've heard the great stories about him and actually got to cover his son. His son played basketball at Southern Local. Can you imagine being Bevo's son, and you got so much pressure on your shoulders, you've got to be good. And of course, his son was a nice high school player, but, maybe 10, 12 points a game. But I think anything when your father is that, renowned, I bet you carry that on your shoulders every time you go on the floor.
It's a lot. And Bevo used to go watch my brother. This is the early 90s he played there. So he was my brother at that time. I think he still holds the record. He was the only back-to-back MVP actually of that conference, the Mid-Ohio Conference at that time. Wow. So he was a heck of a player. Now he's the most modest guy ever. So he'll hate me even bringing this up, but go on.
Well, I was going to say our other connection to Rio Grande is John Lawhorn was the coach at Warren.
That was my brother's coach.
And he went to Rio Grande. Yeah.
That was my brother's coach. I know Coach Law. So
yes.
I had a guy named assistant coach in that team named Earl Thomas, who eventually took over as head coach of Rio Grande after Coach Lawhorn. So my brother will love to hear this because Coach Lawhorn, he knows everything about Coach Lawhorn. He's friends with their family. So that's what we played for. So it was Coach Lawhorn, Coach Thomas, and then Bevo would come and watch some of the games. So I was a little kid then, Dave. I didn't fully appreciate how, kind of iconic some of these people were back then. Yes. I didn't know. I knew they were big, but until I got older and guys like Jim Guido and other people around would start saying, Bevo Francis, like that was a huge, I didn't know. I had no idea.
Basketball and Bob
Evans. Exactly. It's so funny because so many people don't know, especially the younger generation. We didn't, because my brother I knew, but I had no idea if it wasn't for him going there, how rich in history that area was with the basketball and of course the Bob Evans as well.
Sure.
But so he played there and, so my sports background with him and my brother's best friend, who was a great baseball player. And then my dad with Rocky Calavito, I was just, I was pretty much set for life with that. And my dad also grew up in the same neighborhood as Jack Corrigan, who was an announcer for the Indians for quite a while and started in Youngstown.
Jack was in Youngstown. He was
exactly
on WFMJ in Youngstown.
I was going to ask if you knew him. Okay, I'll have to tell Jack, because Jack's the Colorado Rockies voice now, and I had him on the podcast about 2 years ago.
Okay,
and he was awesome and just a great guy.
Another good guy. Yeah,
a really good guy.
People pass through Youngstown.
He told me stories about Youngstown. Yeah. A lot of people. I think. I've had like Michael Reggai on the show. I've had a lot of the announcers and referees and different people, but a lot of them have Youngstown connections. So it's really interesting. I had Phil Bova on the show. Phil Bova's from Cleveland, the Big Ten referee. So,
well, you take the big cities in Ohio, Youngstown, of course, is shrinking, but they have 3 TV stations. Youngstown has 3 television stations, which is the same as Cleveland, the same as the larger cities. So, at one time it was thriving. And of course, now the newspaper's even shut down. The Vindicator it's still printed by the Warren paper, but the Vindicator itself is no longer in existence, which is crazy.
Well, and I want to get into, so let's take it back to your youth and get into your high school days, college days. Where did you go to high school? And at that point, did you see a career in sports at that point?
Well, I didn't know I didn't know I was a writer. first of all, I didn't have any clue that I was a writer. But my connection was, I did work at the newspaper when I was working through high school and through college. I went to Kent, went the first couple of years at the local branch. And what happened was I was actually driving truck, delivering bundles, working in the newspaper office, sweeping some floors, doing a little bit of everything as I was. And my love for sports, I just knew what was going on in the area as well as nationally. Well, we got a new sports editor and he was from outside the area. And so I stopped into his office and I said, boy, I know a lot about sports around here. I'd be glad to, share what I know with you. And he said, hey, that'd be great. Why don't you come in on Friday nights and, help me with the phone calls. And so I began to help him and he certainly began to help me. And so he was there for a couple of years as I was going to school. The crazy thing was I was the youngest daily sports editor in Ohio.
Wow.
I was still 19 when I got the job because I was going to school so I could get the job that they just gave me. So I'm thinking, boy, this is working out well. So he was there for a year and a half and he left and he gave me a recommendation. He said, I think that David can handle the job. And they said, okay, we'll give him a shot. And they did. And it was just a real blessing for me because what a way to stay connected. And, it's been, I had one of those jobs where, man, you mean they're going to pay me too? Let's face it, if it wasn't for having to raise a family, and provide that way, I would have been happy to do it for peanuts, I just loved it and got to meet so many great people and see so many great things, which.
Well, and I want to get into some of the people, of course, there's so many people to talk about, but even like the Jack Corgans of the world who came when they were younger, and
Yes.
kind of learn the ropes in Youngstown. You probably had so many people that ended up going on to do these great things in different areas of sports that came through Youngstown.
They did. And the Warren Tribune, I was very fortunate and I'm glad I went there when I left the Vindicator because they had a better sports section. And when I was there for 24 years and 20 as sports editor, and our paper was constantly judged as one of the best sports sections in Ohio. I think 5 times they were named the best sports section in Ohio and several other times second and third. And our writers were phenomenal. We had an all-star staff that went out and covered guys. We had guys cover the guys who went on to pro sports and the writers went on to big time newspaper jobs. I know Tom Reed was a great reporter we had at Warren, and Tom he wrote for The Athletic and he wrote for the Beacon Journal. And Tom was just a fantastic writer. And Eric Bolin wrote for me, and he now covers the Yankees for New York Newsday. Joe Reedy worked for me. He covered the Cincinnati Bengals. I think he's the AP sports editor in California, and he's got a vote in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Mike McLean covered the Browns for 33 years for us. And in fact, when he retired, he was the senior beat reporter for the Browns. And and so many other guys. Tom Baylog wrote for me, and he went on to cover the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I felt like, not only were we covering the great athletes, we were covering them with great sports writers. And that was fun.
Did you know any of the Cleveland writers, the older guys like Hal Lebovitz and those guys back in the day?
Yes.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. Tony Grossi, of course.
Yep.
Yeah. And a lot of times as the sports editor, generally I would find somebody who was my job to make sure everybody had the right fit on the sports staff. And so, Mike McLean turned out to be a great reporter for the Cleveland Browns. And we also covered the Cavs and we covered the Indians and we tried to cover the Pirates and we tried to cover Youngstown State. And for what we had at one time, I think I had 5 full-time sports writers. Of course, now newspapers, of course, are shrinking and, you don't have the finances to be able to do what we did back then. So I think, and newspapers, frankly, aren't as important now as they were 25 years ago. I had people, as I was delivering the newspapers when I was a teenager, people would literally wait because I was delivering their computer. That's how they found out what was going on in the world. Now newspapers now are shrinking and going out of business because everybody's got their phone, Everybody's got their phone, and you can get the quarter scores of high school games now. How crazy is that?
It's funny because I'm probably the last generation to grow up still getting the newspaper as a kid. When I love the Sunday page especially, and I would go right to the sports section and read all the different. I mean, it was and the thing that was always annoying, especially as like a Cavs fan, when they would play on the West Coast. If they played a late game, they could only if they didn't finish early, you couldn't. You know what happened. So they would, so you would open it up and have no idea who won. It was kind of funny. That's the only way you got your information. You had to know somebody either watched the game or you had to watch like a Sports Center or something. So it's not like it is today. The kids have no idea how great they have it by everything's.
But I think it was fun, especially being in newspapers in that era, because we were so important. I can remember people standing at the door, waiting for me to bring the newspaper so they could find out what happened. And I think that was I think I was the dinosaur, one of the last ones to deal with that and to have that experience. So,
and this is why people like you, your legacy is so important, because 100 years from now, and someone watches this podcast, they can look back and go, wow, by then, who knows what newspapers would, what they'll think of newspapers. But it'll be cool to hear someone's experience of actually being on the front lines of that for 30, 40 years and knowing that history. It's very important.
Great. And I was just able to carve out I guess I was blessed in that I was able to put words together and became an awfully good writer, and had many awfully good writers that I was able to hire. They say you're only as good as the people you surround yourself with. And that's why I'm so proud of the staff and the people that we had and how they branched out and proved, their abilities to write. So very, very pleased with that as I look back on 45 years, in the sports writing business.
I mean, it's a tribute to you, Dave. It really is.
Well, you always feel fortunate because you really don't know where your next move is going. But I go back in the era when you interviewed for a job, how different it is today. Kids even bring their phones in, to talk. But, I was there when you had to wear a tie and, you had to present yourself well and you had to speak, well. And, this was your chance, to go ahead and get an interview and get a job. And today, they don't interview you. You pretty much submit something to me and we'll see what we're going to do. But I like sitting down, talking to people and getting an idea of who they were. And just like, like we're talking now, just, you want to know something about somebody before you bring them on board. So I always thought that was an important part of the job.
And take us back to your time at the Vindicator. What was that, those 5 years? What did you learn that helped propel you to the next 20 years of your career?
Well, being on a staff like that, and I was thrilled to go to Youngstown because this was the 70s and Youngstown sports was a big deal, and there were so many. I went from covering, I think, 12 high schools in East Liverpool to covering 45, 50 high schools, in the Youngstown area. And so I knew the caliber of athletes that they had there and the great tradition of Youngstown sports in general. And so I really felt like it was a step up. I actually had a chance to either go to Pittsburgh or Youngstown. And I ended up in Youngstown and thinking, Youngstown now, like many of the major cities, the steel cities, or the population has shrunk. The number of schools that have closed is amazing. The Youngstown city had 6 public schools and 2 Catholic schools. And, now they're down to 2 and 2. The 2 Catholic schools, Ursuline and Mooney, have remained, but the city schools, they shrunk over the years. But I was thrilled to go there because of the reputation, and had a great time, there, meeting the coaches there, covering the great players that come out of that area. And, just look back on it now, just had a blast.
And Dave, speaking of the talent in Youngstown, I think a lot of people who aren't from this area, aren't from the Midwest or from Ohio, don't understand the amount of talent in Ohio when it comes to sports. I mean, you got Cleveland, Youngstown, Akron, Canton, you got Columbus, Cincinnati, Toledo. I mean, you just got so many, it's incredible the amount of talent that comes out of this state.
Well, there was a time in the 70s at the Vindicator when I remember we looked at the top 25 college football teams, and there was a Youngstown player on 21 of the 25 teams. Wow. It just was amazing, the amount of talent. And before recruiting changed, the coaches could actually come, to the schools. There weren't the restrictions that there are now. And so we would have the big time coaches just popping in all the time, to see the kids. And it's changed a little bit now. Youngstown they don't even have a Division I school anymore. How about that?
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah. I believe Austintown was right on the bubble, but I think they're dropped to Division II. How about Warren? Warren had 2 Division I schools at one time. Now they have 1 school and it's a Division II school. Harding and Western Reserve split. They were both Division I schools. Now they combined, and as the enrollments and population continue to drop, the combination is now a Division II school. So
I know that.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's
wow,
crazy.
That's a good trivia question because I would put my life on that. There's at least one D1 school.
Yeah, and they've dropped. Yeah.
Wow.
So many great athletes came out of there, and I'm thinking about my time at East Liverpool. We had a professional baseball player, Bernie Allen, who played for the Minnesota Twins, later with the Yankees. His claim to fame, if you can call this a claim to fame, he did it at the Hall of Fame game. He hit 3 home runs in the Hall of Fame game.
Oh, really?
Which I think he's the only guy to ever hit 3 home runs in the Hall of Fame. And then we had Norm Van Leer, who was he was the guard for the Chicago Bulls and the radio voice of the Bulls. He was from Midland, Pennsylvania, which was one of the schools on the border, and was next to East Liverpool, and we covered them. But of course, when we went to Youngstown, it just took on a whole different, as I was thinking of some of the top stories, and some of the that I was part of there was Ray Mancini, Boom Boom Mancini, who I covered his first fight, went to his first press conference. Of course, the story was his father was a great fighter, and he went to the war and was injured in the war and was never able to win the championship. And he was also the original Boom Boom, Lenny Boom Boom Mancini. So Ray, who was a great athlete at Cardinal Mooney, he was a great baseball player, football player. He was actually going to go to Xavier on I think it was a baseball or baseball scholarship to Xavier, but he was such a prominent boxer that he obviously decided to go that route, and it turned out to be, the right decision for him. But he was bound and determined to win the title for his father, and he said, "I'm going to win the title, Dad, and give you the belt," and because he was such a charismatic person and of Italian descent in Youngstown, heavily Italian, he was as popular in Youngstown as anybody who, you could imagine. And he did fight for the title. And he did win the title. And he fought one of his title defenses was at Warren's Mollenkopf Stadium on a Saturday afternoon. It was telecast live by CBS. He fought Ernesto España. There were many celebrities in the crowd, including Sylvester Stallone, who came to the fight because he was considering using Ray Mancini in one of the Rocky movies as Rocky's son. Yes, now it ended up Tommy Morrison got that role, and he was called Tommy Gunn, Tommy the whatever it was. And but Mancini was up for that, and Stallone was there, and many of the Browns were there. Dave Logan, I remember, was there, and and Connie Hawkins was there. I don't know if you remember the great Connie Hawkins basketball player. But that was quite a day for Warren to shine. And I'm trying to remember the crowd numbers. Mollenkopf Stadium, the football stadium, held 14,000, but of course they had seats on the field, so that, so there probably were 35,000. Sugar Ray Leonard was there. In fact, he did the broadcast with Tim. Tim, all of a sudden I can't think of Tim's last name, but he was the CBS boxing Saturday afternoon guy. So that turned out to be just a great day in the Mahoney Valley history.
And Dave, what year would that have been?
I'm thinking that was 1981.
Okay.
And
did you know how big Ray would get? And when he first came out of the scene, did you foresee what he would become?
Well, I was told, I learned of him, as he's coming up through right after high school, and got to meet him and got involved with that storyline. But they had the Golden Gloves at Youngstown, and I'm sure they had them in Cleveland too. But the Golden Gloves were a big deal, and they were held every. I'm thinking it was like March, and they were held at a Struthers Field House, which probably can accommodate 4,000 or more fans. And the Golden Gloves would sell out, and it went on for like three weeks, a couple nights a week. They would Golden Gloves, and you'd win and you'd advance to the next week and the next week. And then if you would win in Youngstown, you would go on to the nationals and fight in the National Golden Gloves. And there were so many prominent boxers. Here's one for you. You know how the different organizations recognize champions, the WBA, the NBA, you know, or whatever the BAs you want to put in there. Youngstown had the two lightweight heavyweight champions of the world at the same time. Harry Arroyo was the lightweight champion, and boy, a tremendous fighter. And Ray Mancini was, and they never fought each other. And there was always a question of whether they would, you know, ever get together to fight in the ring. Ray was a come ahead, straightforward, you know, wear you out, you know, body punch you. And Harry was a tremendous boxer. He was also on CBS Sports. And as you can imagine, one town have the two lightweight champions of the world, which that's pretty incredible.
That's really incredible. I never knew that. It's like another piece of history I never knew.
Yeah. So that Youngstown has always been a big boxing, you know, mecca. Years. And, you know, right up there with the football and whatever. And saw so many great football players. And I think the ones that jump out to me the most, there was a kid that played for Cardinal Mooney, who I thought at the time was the greatest player in the United States. His name was Ted Bell. And
what years would this have been?
Ted Bell would have played for Cardinal Mooney in the 70s.
Okay.
And they played Warren Western Reserve during the regular season, and that was Cardinal Mooney's only loss. And then they met for the state championship, the same two schools, Cardinal Mooney and Warren Western Reserve. It was the very first state championship. That was 1972. And it was the first time we had playoffs. And wouldn't you know it, Warren and Youngstown are playing for the championship. And you should have seen the traffic on, 76 going across, because they were all coming from Youngstown and Warren. They were all coming one direction to get to the Rubber Bowl to watch the game, you know. And so I can remember, you know, it was a late arriving crowd because everybody was stuck in the traffic, you know, trying to get in there. But yeah, the two teams, and here's this great Ted Bell, who up until we got a fellow named Maurice Claret, Ted Bell was the greatest running back I had ever seen. And that was when you were allowed to, again, recruiting was different. He got called, Joe Namath called him to try to get him to go to Alabama. O.J. Simpson called him, tried to get him to go to Southern Cal. Those were just, you know, the ones that we knew about. And he got hurt in the state championship game. He hurt his knee, and he was never the same after that. Now, he still went to Michigan State, and he still played defensive back for Michigan State. He was still a fine player, but he was never, was never able to achieve the heights that we all knew that he could achieve. And then, of course, there were many, many, many fine players. Marcus Merrick for Brookfield, I'm sorry, one that there are these teams that you see, and you can watch them scrimmage, and you can say, I don't think anybody can beat these guys. You know, that's happened to me a couple of times. And Brookfield was one of them. And I saw this team. They had 5 Division I players on this Brookfield team, which at that time there were 3 classes. Brookfield was AA. There was AAA, AA, single A. And you watch Brookfield play, and you're going, nobody's going to beat these guys, you know. So they went 10-0, and then they got into the playoffs, and they're playing St. Mary's. Now, it's not a Catholic school. It's St. Mary's, Ohio, which is out on the Indiana border. And St. Mary's was undefeated, and then they had this great running back. In fact, he was the son of a major league pitcher, Galen Cisco. I don't know if you remember him or not. He used to pitch for the Mets. But anyway, he came in, and he was averaging 12 yards a carry, and they were 10-0, and Brookfield was 10-0, and you just didn't score on Brookfield. So I can remember talking to the sports writer at that area. We were exchanging information about the teams. And so here came the Cisco, and he had gained 100 yards for, 29 straight games, ever since he was a sophomore. And I said, he won't get 100 yards against Brookfield, and the guy said, well, maybe we should make a bet on it, and I said, okay. So he didn't get 100 yards. Brookfield beat him. I think it was 20-0, as I'm trying to recall the score of that game. And then Brookfield went on and won the state championship. But they had, again, 5 Division I players. And Merrick became one of the all-time leading tacklers at Ohio State. In fact, I once looked through the Ohio State book in the 80s, their program where they had all their career statistic leaders. And 4 of the 8 leading tacklers, all-time tacklers, were from Trumbull County. with Warren. Yeah, that was Randy Gradishar, Marcus Merrick, Aaron Brown, I think was his name. I'm trying to remember who these guys were, and Van de Cree. These guys were all from Warren and the Warren area, and they were 4 of the 8 all-time leading. Now, I'm sure in the meantime, Chris Spielman came along.
Oh, yeah. All the guys, yeah.
Wiped out a few of those guys, but that was how strong they were. So that was the first great team, I think, that I got to see from Trumbull County. But in that early years, I mean, this is how good Warren football was. In 1971, Warren Harding was the the pole state champion, 10-0. 1972, Warren Western Reserve was the playoff state champion, in addition to the pole champion. They beat Cincinnati Princeton in that championship game, and they beat them pretty bad. I think it was 31-14. Then the next year, Warren Western Reserve went back, and I believe they lost in the state championship game. That was when they played Cardinal Mooney, and they lost to Cardinal Mooney, I believe. I hope I'm not getting confused. But then the year after that, Warren Harding was back, and they won it again. And you can look at all these in the 70s, and it's just one Warren school after another. And in fact, Warren Kennedy then also won the Division I title. They were ranked number 1 in Ohio. So it was quite a decade for the Warren schools. And it's so funny because Warren Harding, before they split into Warren Harding and Warren Western Reserve, they decided Warren was too big for one high school, so they made 2. And when they split, they each got better because they split them into the east side and the west side, and there was such a rivalry between the east side and the west side. I mean, they would both go, they met several times, both being undefeated, one being undefeated, the other having 1 loss, and it just set up for years of that was when Warren was, I think, the football capital of Ohio.
I love hearing these stories. And take us back. Obviously, I'm a diehard Browns fan. Take us Bernie Kosar.
Bernie Kosar.
Your history with him.
Bernie Kosar story for you. Of course, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a teacher strike at Boardman when Bernie was I don't remember if he was a junior or a senior. I think he was a junior. They only got to play 6 games. And they actually scheduled a game or 2 after the regular season because the strike was settled and they were trying to get a couple extra games in. So Bernie got cheated out of throwing, I think they went 6-0, but Bernie lost the chance to be in the playoffs or to even pad his stats a little bit with those number of games. But the great thing about this is they played Warren Western Reserve his senior year. They were in the Steel Valley Conference. That was Boardman, Austintown, Warren Harding, Warren Western Reserve, Howland, Niles. They were in the Steel Valley Conference. So they came to Warren Western Reserve on a Saturday night, and the great Bernie Kosar ran for 2 touchdowns.
Really?
He passed for 2. He ran for 2. Now you remember Bernie running.
Oh, he wasn't the most agile guy.
Yeah, he was. And so they can tell that story that Bernie Kosar ran them to a victory over Warren Western.
Oh, that's funny. I didn't expect you to say that. Oh yeah, he's I actually had a couple of his teammates on the show. My dad is friends with a former Browns player named Reggie Langhorne, who was a receiver back in the 80s.
Yes.
And I had Eric Metcalf on the show too. And of course they love Bernie, and then Reggie's given us a bunch of Bernie stories, but those 80s Browns teams are so fun to watch, and they were just that close to getting to the Super Bowl.
Well, I heard the story at practice that you could set those orange cones, some of those that you see on the highway sometimes, but the orange cones 40 yards downfield, and Bernie would roll out and could hit the cones. So he had it going for him. There's no doubt about it. But he didn't appear to be a great athlete because again, he didn't run well. He was he played basketball as well, and he was a decent basketball player too. But I think it was kind of like that gawking, and he didn't look the best, but boy, he sure could get it done.
And with Bernie back in those high school days, did you foresee him being a great NFL quarterback?
Well, because of the way he could throw the ball, when you can pinpoint it like that. But I kept worrying about how's he going to escape the rush? Is he going to be quick enough to get the passes off? I mean, I even doubted Larry Bird. So I mean, come on, I had a friend who was a coach at Indiana State, and he sent me some video of Larry Bird. He said, "What do you think?" And you know how Larry would sit in the corner and he would take that shot and he would bend his knees and then he would And I said, boy, he's going to get that shot blocked. Come on, you can't go back there and take that much time. So, yeah, I was one of the few that said, I'm not too sure about this Larry Bird character.
Dave, it's so funny you say that. I was just telling Jim the story the other night. I had one of the Showtime Lakers, Michael Cooper, on my show. And Coop was telling me, he used to guard Larry in the finals. And he said, Brad, Larry couldn't jump over a Coke can, but he was so tough to guard. He goes, when you look at him, you think, yeah, this guy's nothing. He goes, me and Kareem one time were double teaming him, and somehow he got out of it, turned around and made some crazy jumper. And he goes, he would talk trash to you. And Cooper said, I said, who was tougher, MJ or Larry? He goes, Larry, because MJ was super athletic, obviously.
So athletic, yeah.
But back in the 80s, he goes, Larry could do stuff. He was always in movement, always coming around picks, always kind of playing mind games, and he can shoot. He could shoot from 35 feet out. So he goes, and he's a great passer. I mean, Larry, it's so funny you mentioned that, because Coop, that's the first thing.
I don't like telling this story that I was a thumbs down on Larry Bird.
I think a lot of people were skeptical back in those days. I mean, because he just didn't look like. Even now, I'll watch highlights. I don't know how he did what he did. He was just an incredible player, but I mean, he doesn't look. He didn't look like he'd be able to compete at that level. Yeah. So yeah.
Well, then there were so many great players along the way, but of course the ones that stand out, Maurice Clarett stands out, and the saga of Maurice Clarett. What a story! I mean, as a freshman, he is playing at Austin Town Fitch, and he's gaining yards. Running the ball. He's gaining. I don't know if he gained 700 or 800 yards as a freshman, running against the Steel Valley and the big schools. And then comes he's going to kind of like market himself to see where he wants to go to school. So he goes around and talks to different coaches. He went to Cardinal Mooney. His dad played at Cardinal Mooney. He didn't have a good relationship with his dad, but his dad played at Cardinal Mooney. And so he went to talk to Butchie. And Don Butchie, the coach of Cardinal Mooney, was there for many, many years, one of the great high school coaches of all time. And Don wasn't having any of it. He says, you're not going to come here and tell us what you're going to do. We're going to decide what you're going to do. And so Maurice didn't like hearing that, so he didn't go to Mooney. But of course, he ended up going to Warren Harding, and, just had some great days at Warren Harding. And the greatest game, I think, that I have seen from an individual was Maurice Clarett against Lakewood St. Edward. And it was the playoff game, and it was at Kent. It was at Kent.
I have friends that played on that team. Yep.
Okay. I think Lakewood St. Edward came into that game. I think it was the second playoff game. I don't think it was the first. So Lakewood St. Edward was 11-0, and they had 6 shutouts. I mean, they just, not only would they score a ton, you wouldn't score. They were that good. And Maurice Clarett put on a performance that I have it on video if you ever want to see it.
I would love to see it.
Anyway, in the first half, against this team that had 6 or 7 shutouts against big schools, Ignatius and, the big people.
Oh, those are the big boys. Yeah, absolutely.
He had 303 yards in the first half and 5 touchdowns.
Oh, my God.
And he ended up with 400 yards. He got another 100 in the second half. And he had touchdown runs where he juked somebody and then outran him to the end zone. Then he had another one where he literally ran over 3 or 4 people and went all the way to the end zone. He had ones where he had speed. He had the stop and go. He just had it all. And that was the greatest single game performance that I ever saw. And I saw him. I went up to Warren Harding. It was later after maybe that game, maybe a week later, excuse me. And I saw him walking out of the locker room. And I said, he was, I said, Maurice, how's the recruiting stuff going? And we began to talk, and he said, I'm going to buy my outfit that I'm going to wear to the Heisman Trophy presentation. So this was when he was a junior in high school. He was picking out his Heisman Trophy winning costume. So he didn't lack confidence.
It's funny. One of my buddies, so I grew up in Avon Lake, Ohio, and one of my buddies at that point was one of the highest recruits in the nation defensively.
Linebacker, number 5.
Mike DeAndre. Yep, that's one.
Yes.
He's one of my best friends to this day. So I had him on the show about last year, and Mike was talking about Maurice, and I don't know if they roomed together. I think they maybe were like somehow they were put together for some because they were the number 1 and 2 recruits in that class. And he loved Maurice, and he talked about that his freshman year, and they both played. I mean, Mike, as a freshman, was playing, and so was Maurice, obviously. And he's like, Brad, that he was unbelievable. I mean, like that. I mean, okay, let me ask you this question: have you ever seen a running back, a freshman running back, have that big of an impact on a team?
No, No. And he had an amazing impact. He didn't even play all the games. His shoulder, he played hurt a lot of that season and still put up phenomenal numbers for Ohio State. And really, they don't win. Let's face it, they don't win the national championship without him.
No way. They don't even get there. No,
they don't even get there. And the thing I noticed about him, he had a great personality. He really did. He had a great personality. He could sit at a board meeting, or he could be on the street with the Crips and the Bloods, and he could speak to all of them, and he could fit in. I mean, it's just, but the curse for Maurice was, we were talking about LeBron. He and LeBron came through at the same time. He and LeBron spoke with each other. They were the two great. I would almost say that Maurice might have been bigger than LeBron. I mean, it was one or the other.
Maurice was huge. People don't forget how big he was.
He was the USA Today Player of the Year.
Yeah.
And of course we know how great LeBron was. Well, I think it really irritated Maurice that LeBron was able to do everything that he did, and it didn't work out for him. In other words, LeBron go right to the NBA, play right away, make all kinds of money, drive that Hummer around, and Maurice, he had to go to college, and he didn't like it. And then he actually tried to go early. Remember, it was 1 year, and he took the NFL.
I remember that.
And then lost.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
But he has, and then he had his issues with the situation in Columbus, where he had to spend a few years behind bars. But he's out now, and he's even an inspirational speaker. He comes on sports shows in Cleveland a lot, and the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show with Jay Crawford, who I have my podcast as well, and they interview him every now and then about the Browns, and I'll tell you what, he's just seems like a great guy. He is, and it's just he's lived that life where he's seen everything you could possibly see. But I've noticed that about him. I mean, if he could be the most polite gentleman, or like I say, he can talk whatever kind of talk you want to talk. He can do it, and it's a shame because I really feel the injuries did hurt him, and then all the controversy hurt him, and he did get drafted by the Broncos, and I still thought he was going to be a player, and his body just couldn't hold up. If
it wasn't for all that, I mean, obviously I know that took a toll on him, but let's just say there was no injuries and he didn't have that controversy. I mean, do you think he could have been one of the top 5 to 10 running backs of all time?
Boy, he sure looked like he was on his way. I mean, I watched a game on the sidelines when Harding had one of their great teams when he was there as a senior, and they were playing. I mean, they drilled everybody. They drilled Cincinnati Moeller. I think they beat Moeller 55-0. Then they beat Canton McKinley 47-6. And then I'm there when they're playing Ursuline. Ursuline was really good. They beat them 35-0. And I'm on the sidelines, and I'm watching the eyes of these defensive backs when Maurice gets loose and he's coming at them. I mean, these guys were petrified because you don't know what he's going to do to you. And if you try to take him on straight, go ahead, but he's going to make you look foolish. He's going to dip a shoulder, and then he's going to go the other way. And I watched the Ursuline game from the sidelines, and I saw it. I saw the defensive backs react to him, and I felt so bad for him.
One of my buddies who played against him, I can't remember which buddy it was, but I know it was someone that played for either Ignatius or Eds. And they said, Brad, his thighs were huge. They're bigger than my body. And you don't realize how big he was until you're next to him trying to tackle him. And they said he was a monster.
He was a nice basketball player too, but obviously
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he could do that game too. So yeah, those were the two biggest sports names. Well, including America football names. Basketball, the great story I have. I don't know if one of the greatest teams ever to come out of the Mahoney Valley and out of Youngstown was Youngstown Rayan in this was the 70s, and I'm going to say late 70s. In fact, you might be able to help me. Cathedral Latin was great in the 70s. Bob Lowry was a player Bob Lowry was the point guard, and he was phenomenal. Latin was number 1, Rayan was number 2. They played each other in Youngstown on a Saturday night, and Rayan beat him. But Rayan was just phenomenal. Joe James, who for many years, Joe James was such a stud. He ended up going to was it Michigan? I think it was Michigan. And Greg Jones was the other Division I player. Actually, they might have had 3 or 4 Division I players, but he went to West Virginia. And I was there when Gail Catlett came. He was coaching West Virginia, and he said he was talking about Greg Jones, and he said, "I've only seen one guard that I like better than Greg Jones in the United States, and that's Isaiah Thomas out of Illinois or wherever he was. I think he was from Illinois. So that's how good, James and Jones, we called them the James gang, but they had so many big games and just a phenomenal team. They did a great job. It was fun watching them.
I never knew that. I'm going to have to look them up. That's interesting.
So the rumor started that could Joe James be LeBron James' father? And I'm
Who
thinking,
knows?
He was pretty good, Joe James. Maybe he was, but I think that's been true. That's been proved false. So anyway, we'll let that one slide.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, these are the kind of stories I love hearing because not someone who grew up in Cleveland. I know some of the Youngstown stories because they're pretty famous, but these kind of stories I don't know. And unless you grew up in that era, you wouldn't know those. So for all the listeners, especially the ones who are younger, these are really cool stories because these are a part of Ohio sports history and the U.S. History of sports in the U.S. So you're talking about some of the greatest teams and athletes to ever play these high school games. So I love hearing these. And I want to transition to Jim Tressel. And, covering Jim and Youngstown State and, of course, Ohio State days, take us through, because I have several friends that played for him and both at Youngstown State and Ohio State, and they just have nothing bad to say about him. They love the guy.
Well, when before we knew the complete Jim Tressel, Akron and Youngstown State had the job openings at the same time. And Akron hired Jerry Faust and the Notre Dame coach, who was the great Cincinnati Moeller coach and went to Notre Dame and kind of fizzled because high school's not Notre Dame and he just wasn't quite up to the task. But we got Jim Tressel at YSU. They got Jerry Faust. And everybody was saying, gee, why didn't we get Jerry Faust? Why did we get this Tressel guy while they get Jerry Faust? This doesn't make any sense. Well, turns out, and of course, the first season for Youngstown, they were 2-9. But they beat Akron, I think, as I recall. That was one of their wins. But so it turned out we thought we got the short end of the straw, and here we got the longest straw of all. For what he did there, and just the culture that he built there, and his personality, and it was just exciting to watch that build. I mean, the first time they started playing big games, you're thinking, well, this is unique, this is fun, but is this just a one-time thing? We're not going to keep this up. And of course he did keep it up. They were at the top or near the top every year. I think they were in 6 national championship games and won 4. And they had the big game at Youngstown with the playoffs where they played Alcorn State, and Steve McNair was the quarterback of Alcorn State. Yep. And and they beat them, and it was just and to see the stands grow and get excited, and just going to Youngstown football games became an event. It became something you didn't want to miss, and that's all because of Tressel. Just what he built there, and just watching the discipline with which they played. And we didn't realize they were playing Tressel ball at the time, because I remember when Tressel got the job at Ohio State, I called my friend, a diehard Ohio State fan who lived in Illinois. And I says, I got good news and bad news for you. And he said, what's the good news? And I said, well, the good news is Jim Tressel was going to win a lot of games. The bad news is they're all going to be by 3 points. So, but it didn't turn out to be quite that bad. But yeah, but the other thing about Tressel, he was just an impressive person, and it didn't matter whether you were important or not important. He was just who he was for everybody, and he treated everybody with respect. And I know that when word came out that he was interviewing, we all thought that Glenn Mason had the inside track to that job. He had coached at Minnesota. He was an Ohio State player. He had some decent Minnesota teams. So you're thinking, well, maybe when he gets the kind of talent Ohio State has, he'll probably do great things. We didn't even think Tressel would be a candidate for that job. But the other thing is, when we heard Tressel was getting an interview, I remember talking to some friends, and I said, if he gets an interview, he's getting that job because of the way he interviews. He is just full of confidence. He makes you believe what he believes. And so we felt, we weren't surprised that he got that job. And you remember the statement that he made at the basketball game when they introduced him as the new head coach. And he told everybody how proud they would be when they went to Ann Arbor, in 10 days or whatever it was. And, what kind of a guy makes that kind of statement? You know what I mean? Right. And then he goes, guys who can back it up make that kind of statement. And he did it. So, yeah, that was certainly a fun time. And Youngstown State football will always be known for Jim Tressel. The thing about Youngstown is they have this great football tradition, starting back with their first coach, Dyke Beatty, who invented the penalty flag. I don't know if you know that or not.
No, I didn't know that. No.
Penalty flag was invented by Dyke Beatty, the first Youngstown State football coach. So they were Youngstown College at that time.
What year would that have been, roughly?
I'm thinking 40s, 50s.
Okay.
But his wife, they couldn't hear the whistles. The referees used to blow the whistles for a penalty. And so his wife, Gwen, I'm trying to think if her name was Gwen, but she sewed the yellow the flags, and the first time they were ever used in the Youngstown State football game, and that's why they're used in the country now.
That is a great piece of football history right there, Dave. Great. Yeah, I never knew that.
Yeah. So that was something that I was amazed when I heard it. I thought that was a wonderful story.
I'm gonna. That's a trivia question. I'm gonna get my friends on.
Okay, you got it.
Great. So when you at Youngstown, like when you look back at the last, I mean, really, I guess in Youngstown history, in your opinion, who is the greatest athlete to ever come out of Youngstown? If you had to pick one, who would that be?
Well, now sometimes we call it the Valley, the Mahoning Valley, which includes Youngstown and Warren. They're connected in the same way that like Akron and Canton are connected. Okay. I would say that now we had some great old timers that came out. And of course, I didn't get to see Bob Dove play. Bob Dove was a great lineman. He played at Notre Dame. He was considered the top lineman in the country. A guy from Cheney won the Heisman Trophy. Trying to think of his name now, and all of a sudden I'm slipping on it. I guess that's age creeping in, but I know he was one of the Heisman Trophy winners. And then there's the great Paul Warfield, who played at Warren Harding, and was part of the Valley. And you'd have to put Bernie in there with that group, but those are the guys that stand up at the top of the list, at least for me.
Paul Warfield, that's a huge name right there.
Yeah, how about that? Yeah, that would be the name I think that everybody would say tops of the list. Baseball, of course, there was Dave Dravecki. He pitched at Boardman, ended up losing his arm, pitched with one arm.
Oh, like Jim Abbott.
Yeah, like Jim Abbott. Yeah, cancer in his shoulder.
Wow.
And I can't remember the story, but I think this is a true story, that he was a golfer. He continued to golf with one hand, and he got a hole in one, I believe, with one arm.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah. And we always tell, I hope this joke is not in poor taste, but I'm going to tell it anyway. I don't know if you remember this. Jim Abbott pitched for the Yankees for a while.
Oh, yeah. I remember that. Yep.
They had a bus wreck. I don't know if you remember the bus that they were on over a hill, down over the hill. So, we were telling the story that they got there and they saw Jim Abbott and they started looking for his arm, because they said it's got to be here somewhere. But anyway,
it's funny. I was just telling my nephew about him, and he looked at me. He's like, a pitcher pitched with one arm. I said, I swear to God. And he had to switch his glove real quick.
Put his glove there.
Yeah. And we were talking to Burt Blyleven's son, Todd, and Todd's like, he was unbelievable. What he knew Jim Abbott real well.
I think he made the All-Star team.
He did. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, did he win a Gold Glove? I can't remember. He might. There's some crazy stat with him, but
those are stories you tell kids today, they wouldn't believe it.
Oh, they wouldn't believe you. And thank God we have some highlights. But I remember watching him as I was a little kid back then, the 80s and 90s, and you would see him, and he would have his glove tucked under his arm, and then he would, if the ball was hit to him, he would have to put his glove on. I mean, what an impressive. I mean, that's just, talk about someone who just, he did the most of what he had. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Well, the other baseball story was when the minor league Mahoning Valley Scrappers came into the Valley and played. They were the Cleveland Indians short A farm team. And so we saw Sabathia pitch. We saw the great catcher, Victor
Martinez.
Martinez.
Yep. Loved them.
Came up. Yeah. And many other of the great Indian stars came in there and played. And, we got a chance to see them. And I think the Scrappers have now been there for like 25 years. I mean, it's crazy.
Because even to this day, they still have the now Guardians still have an incredible farm system. I mean, they're known for it's one of the top 2 or 3 systems in all baseball.
Yes.
So you guys saw a lot of great players come out of there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So anyway, I think we've touched a lot of bases. I'm trying. Oh, the other sport that we haven't talked. Well, we talked about Ray Mancini, but how about Ernie Shavers? Ernie
Shavers, I wanted to get into that. Yes,
from the area, and we had covered many of Ernie Shavers, and they had interviewed. I told you that Stallone came in to consider Mancini for a part in one of his films. He also considered Ernie Shavers for a part in one of his films because he wanted Ernie to be Stallone's not a very big guy, and Shavers was pretty big. But the story was Ernie was a wonderful man, wonderful human being, but he talked fast and he wasn't able to, some of his words didn't get pronounced just right. And so I think Stallone decided to pass on that, but they come in and see Ernie. But Ernie fought Holmes and he fought Ali. And, they say he was the hardest, and he just passed away, I think, last year. They said that he was the hardest hitting heavyweight in history. And so it was, but such a sweet man, but you see, you stop and talk to him, you just think, what a wonderful guy. You wouldn't realize he could knock your head off if he wanted to.
Is it true, Dave? Didn't Mike Tyson have a house, or him or Don King somewhere out in the?
He did.
Yeah,
Mike
that's what I
thought. Had a house just outside of Warren, and because he wanted to be near Don King's training camp, which was in Orwell, and so Tyson bought a house in Southington, Ohio, which is one of the northern suburbs of Warren, I guess you would call it, and he had a basketball court, and he played basketball games. He came to the Y in Warren and played with the kids, played with the kids there. But I heard the big thing about Mike Tyson was he would rent DVDs and then wouldn't return them. And he was going to go collect them. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
He's going to Tyson's house to get them.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I never knew, because I always heard those stories. I never knew if they're rumors or what, that he had a house out that way. And it's confirmed then, because I heard that for years from people in my family.
Yeah.
And, Tyson had a house out in Youngstown. I go, you sure? They said, yeah.
We went up to King's Camp because to watch him train one day, and he was obviously there, but you never know how to quite approach Mike Tyson. No. It's like one of the stories we did for Randy Gradishar was one of those great athletes from Warren, who was one of the leading all-time tacklers for Ohio State. He played middle linebacker for the Denver Broncos, and he played for 9 years, and 7 times he was all pro. And one time he was the NFL Player of the Year, defensive.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he never missed a game. He played every game for 9 years, and he's not in the Hall of Fame. And we're kind of disappointed that he's not in the Hall of Fame. They made it to 1 Super Bowl, but the fact that he never missed a game and played all those years and was 7 times an All-Pro.
Oh, if you're a 7-time All-Pro and Defensive Player of the Year, you should be in the Hall of Fame.
I think so too.
Hands down.
Never miss a game. A middle linebacker.
Yeah, that's a Hall of Fame career.
Well, he's been nominated a couple of times, but just hasn't got the votes to get in. But he was playing. Excuse me. He was playing in Pittsburgh. Season opener. A fellow by the name of John Elway was debuting for the Broncos. He didn't even start because they used Steve. Oh, I can't remember Steve's name. Backup quarterback. They wanted him to start because they didn't want to throw Elway out there right away. They wanted him to. So anyway, we thought it was interesting that the 2 teams had the 2 premier linebackers in the NFL. The Steelers had Jack Lambert, and the Broncos had Randy Gradishar. So got one of the other writers, and I said, let's go to the game. And he knew Gradishar. He knew the family. And I said, well, you go talk to Randy Gradishar, and here's what we're going to do. You find out what he likes about Jack Lambert's game, because they're totally different linebackers. Lambert is just physical, throw you on the ground. Gradishar is a thinker. Where do I got to be? What hole am I, who am I reading? And I said, it'd be real interesting just to have Gradishar critique Lambert and Lambert critique Gradishar. So I said, since you know Gradishar, you go into the Denver locker room. And of course, we don't know who's going to win the game. So, I mean, that obviously affects some attitudes and stuff. And I said, I'll take Lambert. Big mistake. But anyway, So anyway, this one, locker rooms were a little more open than they are now. And, instead of them bringing players to a spot, you actually went in the locker rooms, sought out the players you want, talked to them at their locker. And so anyway, game's over and Denver won the game 14-10, I think. And so I go in to talk to Lambert, and Lambert's not an easy guy to talk to, even when they win, but when they lose, So I did my best. I mean, I walked up there with, I said, hey, told him who I was and where I was from. And he's from a place close to Warren. I'm trying to remember the high school he went to, but it's just outside our coverage area, but it's one of the high schools up there. I'm disappointed. I can't remember. But anyway, so there's two linebackers from about a 30-mile separation in Ohio that are playing on these two teams, and they're the two premier middle linebackers. So the game's over, and I go to Lambert, and I explain. I said, Jack, can I have a minute of your time? And I said, I'm here. I said, I'm from the Warren Tribune, and, I wanted to ask you, I said, you and Granish are two of the most respected linebackers in football, and he's from our area too. And I'd like to get your critique on his game and how he plays the position. And I can't really say what Lambert said to me, but
you can say, I don't care.
Yeah, he just said, I don't give an F about, Randy Gradishar, and get out of my face. Now here it is, I've got to get a story out of this. You know what I mean? So I'm not one to take, I step back and regroup and regather myself, So after several attempts, I finally got him to say a word or two. But when Jack Lambert looks at you with those missing teeth, and tells you.
Oh, that's great.
I once heard a story about Jack Lambert. I can't swear that this is the truth, but the guy who told me swears it was the truth. And it was during his Kent State days. They went to get gas. And of course, they were all buzzed. And he got out of, he was out of the car. And I don't know if he did it alone or another guy, but they pulled the gas pump right out of the.
Are you kidding me?
Right out, no. And then they got in the car and drove off. So, Lambert was a character, but you certainly didn't want to get him in any kind of a mood, And that reminds me of another guy. There was a guy who played for Nebraska and coached in Warren. They had a flat tire one time. It was a Volkswagen. They didn't have a jack, so he held the car up. I always thought that was funny. And they changed the tire while he was holding it up. So you gather these stories through the years.
Oh, yeah. I mean, those are incredible. If that story is true about Lambert, I mean, wow.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me, though. It really wouldn't.
Yeah. He was something. He's still scary. I can't imagine him playing now with the way they protect the quarterbacks, because he was always. He always criticized the league for trying to, protect the quarterbacks too much. But what are you going to say? So,
it's such a different era now in so many ways. But though I love that back then I grew up in, I wasn't around in the 70s, but in the 80s and 90s, so I saw like the Lawrence Taylor and those kind of guys and Ronnie Lott, and those guys are still hitting hard back then. That was just
And of course the one that's most remembered is Jack Tatum, who played for Ohio State.
I had Jim Stillwagon's brothers on the show, the Stillwagon brothers, and Jim passed away several years ago, but his brothers came on the show, Woody and Tom. They're great guys. And one of actually me and Jim's friends, a sales manager of ours, actually, it's his brother-in-law's. So Jim Stillwagon was his brother-in-law, and they came on and they had a ton of stories about Ohio State and all back in those days. Oh, I go on, but I wanted to tell you that it was so cool to hear their experiences, because actually one of their brothers, Tom Stillwagon, played for Bo Schembechler.
Okay.
You played for Bo, and then
Miami.
Of course, exactly, at Miami, and then of course, Jim played for Ohio State, so it was a really interesting dynamic, and they were still very close with Woody for years afterwards, and family friends, and it was really interesting story to hear all that, and how Woody and Bo were actually friends, and I didn't know all that.
Well, I got to watch my seat in the press box for Ohio State games was right on the 50-yard line. I don't know how I did that, but I got it, because it was the second row, but to be right on the 50 and to look down. And this, of course, was 30 years ago or so, but I'm sitting there and there's an open seat right beside me. The guy didn't come for that seat. And so I'm watching the game. I think it was the Iowa game. And I see Woody. He didn't have that's when he didn't have a suite. He's walking down looking for a place to sit. So he sits right beside me. So I'm thinking, this is great. I'm watching a Ohio State game with Woody Hayes. Nothing is better than this.
Oh, it's like heaven.
But don't say the wrong thing. Just if you're going to have some conversation, make sure you say it right. So first thing I said, I shook his hand, said hello, told him I was from Paul Warfield's hometown. That was a good way to warm him up. But that was when the scoreboard had just been enlarged and had just had the new graphics. And I'm going to say 84, 85, Keith Byers was playing at that time.
Okay. Yep.
And so I decided, I wanted to make conversation because this is a rare opportunity, And so I said, Coach, what do you think of the scoreboard? I'm thinking, it's another. He said, I hate it, hate it, hate it. He says, too many people are going to be watching the scoreboard. They're not going to be watching the game. They got to be watching the game. They don't want to be watching the scoreboard. Typical, exactly what you would want to get from Woody. But, I just always remembered that. And then as the years went by, I was sitting, and then in came Earl Bruce, and he sat beside me. And I said, Coach, this is the second time I've got to watch an Ohio State game with a former Ohio State coach. I said, I sat with Woody, a few years ago, and he said, oh, you're working your way down, huh? And I said, yeah, I guess I am.
I didn't know, that's an incredible story to have both those guys sit next to you like that.
Yeah.
But what was Woody like the rest of the game? Was he, is he fun to watch with him? Did he not say much?
He was. He really, I'm trying to remember if that was the Byers game where Byers threw a touchdown pass, caught a touchdown pass, and ran for a touchdown. And he might have been the game where he lost his shoe and then ran with one shoe on and all the way for a touchdown. Yeah. And, but he was quite impressed with Byers. He liked him quite a bit. And, other than that, it was just a little chit chat, but I remember I especially remember his ire at the scoreboard. He didn't want any of that. He wanted the fans to be watching the game. That's what they're there to do,
Seems like classic Woody right there.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, I
have to tell you another story though. I'm on my way to a high school game. This is when I'm in East Liverpool, and I'm driving to Steubenville to cover a game down in Steubenville, and I happen to have some old, 16 millimeter. They had them in the tin cases. They hold the, that's when you had to put them on the reel, and they ran through this is how coaches back in the day, it's game film. That's how you had to do it. You put it in your projector and you ran these things through. I got 4 or 5 of these stacked up in the back. I'm running a little late, so I'm speeding. And the lights come on behind me, and pull me over. So Ohio State Patrol guy, and he comes over and he said, he looks in and he looks around and he says, where are you going in such a hurry? And of course, I'm trying to think what's a good story let's say here. And I said, sir, I'm on my way to Columbus. I've got to get these films to Woody Hayes. He's got to see them. I picked him up. I showed him the films. He said, well, then you better be on your way, son. So
are you kidding?
Yeah. So, if you got the right things in your car, you can get away. Thank goodness he was a Michigan fan. I'd have paid double. But anyway.
That is awesome. Oh, man. So I have a couple more questions. I could talk to you, Dave, for hours about all this stuff because there's so much history here to go over, but a couple more questions. And
sure.
One of them is for anybody younger coming into the industry, maybe the sports writing industry or within sports in general. What was the biggest challenge of your career?
Well, you always you want to be confident in yourself. But there's always, doubts when you go. I went from a smaller paper to a bigger paper, and you want to prove yourself every step of the way. And that's all it is. It's like being a rookie on a football team. You want to show that you can do the job. And then when people see you can do the job, they'll respect you. I think one of the things I got from my father that has really helped me was a work ethic. If you put in the work and you do the job, people will notice. I found out sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. I never missed a day of work. I remember breaking my wrist. I remember spraining my knee. I remember hopping out of the car and hopping across the parking lot, hopping in the elevator, one leg going up, hopping to my desk and sitting down for 8 hours, and then getting up, hopping back out and getting in the car and going home because I couldn't walk on that. And at the time, you're proud of that because you're thinking, hey, I'd worked the day my children were born. because it's not like it is now where you take 6 weeks off or however many weeks they give you. I thought, hey, my wife's having a baby. I'm not having a baby. I got to work. So you go in and you do all that. And then you get to the end of your career and you kind of look at yourself and say, was I foolish? It was so ingrained to me that you do what you're expected to do and beyond. And, even after I did all that, sometimes I've looked back and I've thought, I kind of wish I'd have done that differently. I think I should have taken a day off when my kids were born, I should have, but it wasn't, it was a different time. That was kind of expected. And so you did it. But, and I'm kind of, I'm one side, I'm proud that I did it. The other side, I'm kind of saying, what were you kind of stupid for doing that too. So
I think the work ethic is to be commended, obviously. And I think I definitely understand what you're saying, because one of the biggest regrets I hear people towards the end of their lives, like who are in hospices and things like that, is that they work too much. Like they didn't appreciate their family enough. They didn't spend enough time with their family. But when you're going, like when you said, it's ingrained in you, like my dad's like you, when something like that's ingrained in you over a period of years, that's just all and that you're not going to, it's hard to change that, especially when you're a hard worker. Like, so
that's right.
You didn't do anything wrong in the sense that you didn't know any better. You were doing what you thought you needed to do. So
that's right. And you try to pass that along too.
Exactly.
And so that's my goal for my kids. I have a son that lives about 3 miles from me, which is one of the reasons we moved here to Charlotte. When we left Youngstown and moved to Charlotte, I said, they both have 365 days a year. But I said, in Youngstown, 65 days are sunshine, and in Charlotte, 300 days are sunshine. So I'm going down there. Yeah,
that's a really good point. Yeah, especially now we're. Just how cold it's been recently, and the older I get, I'm 39 now, and the older I get, the less I can take some of the winters too. And I never thought I would say that, but that's brutal.
It is,
and just the grayness and the getting dark, everything about it. Too much.
I felt like you hibernate. You say goodbye to your neighbors. We'll see you again in the spring, and because it's dark by the time everybody gets home. And,
exactly.
Yeah, it's. I'm much happier with down here where we still get winter, but it's a mild version, much milder.
I can take that. Yeah, that's not bad at all. I could definitely take that. So when you look back at your career, what was your favorite sports story that you covered throughout your career?
Boy. Well, I covered the Super Bowl when with DeBartolo. DeBartolo was another Youngstown person, and he used to bring the 49ers into Youngstown after every Super Bowl, and they would have a party, and we'd have access to all the 49ers and whatever, which was great. And so that was such a highlight. But I think for the most part, most of the stories we talked about tonight have been highlights for me when I think back to that. Just the friendships and the great athletic competitions that I got to see, and it's kind of all rolled into one. But it was a great career. I loved it. I think that was God's way of saying, you're not much of an athlete. How would you like to be around it? So I said, yeah, I think I would. So I was able to do that, and I'm forever grateful for that.
Dave, I feel in some ways it's almost, you almost had a more, I don't want to say fulfilling, but like, compared to an athlete who might have played for 6-7 years and then never was around the sport again necessarily, you got to be involved in it for your whole life.
That's right. Yes. And when newspapers were important, when they were relevant,
exactly.
I was able to see what that was like. And, that was a great feeling too. You felt like it was a really important profession. And, so many professions today are being wiped out, replaced, and it's sad. I'll be honest with you. I don't even read the newspapers anymore. I find out everything I need on my phone. Mm-hmm. And here I am, newspapers were my life. And so I can't fault anybody else for doing that. Times are changing. So.
Yep. But again, this is why your story is so important, especially for the younger generation to hear what it was like and what you went through in your experiences. I think it's so interesting and fascinating as a part of history. And one last question for you. I ask this to every guest, and I can't wait to hear your answer. When you look back at your career, what do you want people to know about the legacy of Dave Burcham?
Well, I try to treat everybody right. I know interviews people. I'm really at ease interviewing people, and I think I'm at ease with it because I just talk to them. I just want to know their story. I want to know something about them, and I find that if you take an interest in people, they'll talk to you. There's people that You can approach anybody. You can say anything if you say it the right way and you present yourself the right way. And I've tried to do that. I mean, it's a tough thing. I've written some news stories where I had to talk to parents who lost a son or a daughter. I've been in tough situations where you have to be delicate, but you also have to be straightforward. And that has proven to be helpful to me. I think I just have God's blessed me with the personality that I've been able to communicate with people, because this is a communicating business. And if you want people to trust you with their thoughts, you've got to gain that trust, and I feel that I can do that. I feel like I can get people to tell me things they won't tell other people because they trust me and they know that I'll treat them right. And, there's been times where they've told me something and I said, well, I won't print that if you don't want me to print it, and I've even called them later and I've said, hey, I'd really like to print that, but I don't want to do it without your okay, and some of them have said, okay, or, and there's been a few that said no, but, just try to treat people well. And I think that's just the best thing that you could learn and the best policy that you can have.
Dave, just talking to you for the past, hour and a half that I've talked to you, I can tell you're very genuine, straightforward, and it's easy to talk to you because, most of the guests I've had on here have been pretty cool for the most part, but you have some people maybe don't talk as much or a little bit hesitant. You can tell that you're just it just comes naturally for you. It's obvious. The first couple of seconds we talked, I can tell.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, that's what I think has been a key to getting stories and to get people, so many people have trusted me and I know so many of their stories and I've been blessed to write their stories, and then, because I often wonder now that I'm retired and moved down here, I often think about some of the older gentlemen that I've interviewed and wondering if they're still alive. And, some of their stories have stuck with me. And I've saved some newspapers of stories I want to remember and reread and, just keep for personal reasons. But anyway, I enjoyed my career and, just had a lot of fun doing it. And they paid me too.
And Dave, when you look back, I mean, you will forever be a part of not only Youngstown and Mahoning Valley, sports history, but Ohio sports history. For the rest of your life, your name is intertwined with that forever, and it's got to feel pretty good. Well,
I still consider myself an Ohioan, even though I'm in the Carolinas now. I take pride in Ohio, and I take pride in all the Ohio schools. I'm just one of those people that I will look at the basketball scores every night and see how every single team in Ohio did. And so that's just with me. That's just what I do.
It's so funny when I think I don't know if it's USA Today. One of the papers always takes a poll of different states, state pride. Ohio is always number one, almost every single year. Yeah, it's always Ohio.
Wow.
People just, I don't know what it is. It's just people, something about Ohio.
There's so many Ohio State fans down here. I feel like I'm home. And when we moved here, there was the guy next door had a big Michigan flag out. And I told my wife, I got to go talk to him before I buy this house. So I went and talked to him and I said, I'm a big Ohio State fan. I see your flag. Do you think we're going to have any trouble? And he said, no, we won't have any trouble. He said, we'll be fine. And I said, that's okay. Get used to losing and we'll be all right.
But, hopefully it changes back the other way soon. Because
the last two have been a little painful, but
Dave, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time. And again, thanks, Jim, for making this happen. This is you're a perfect fit for the podcast, and your stories are just amazing. I learned a lot tonight that I didn't know about Youngstown and Ohio sports history. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Brad. Nice to speak with you.
Nice to speak with you too. All right. Thanks, Dave. Take care.
Bye-bye.